all about practicing, making sure that there are places they can send this equipment should they need to, should there be some kind of emergency in their normal stations. But Alex, let's come back to you then, and nuclear weapons.
The New York Times has picked up on a document which is so classified that it doesn't exist on the internet or even the intranet. It is only in hard copy, and it has been permitted now for the New York Times, which of course is a newspaper of record with privileged briefing rights. They've been permitted to note that the latest development, here risibly called Biden approved, of course he doesn't know what day of the week it is, so he's being told what to approve, but the thing that's new is that Russia, China and North Korea are being regarded as a possible coordinated nuclear threat. So the key paragraph here is that the document, called the Nuclear Employment Guidance, has, according to an authorized briefing on what's in the document that nobody's allowed to see, says that now US senior strategists need to reckon with the possibility that these three Eurasian powers will launch strikes in a coordinated fashion. It reminds me of when I spoke to Joel Skousen a few years ago. Perhaps Kenny will put the link into the show notes for that, in which Skousen pointed out that even back in Clinton's day, he was leaned upon by the eminence grise of his time in office to amend Presidential Defense Directive 60, PDD 60, similarly classified, so that allegedly the United States since then has gone to an absorb first strike stance. Let all the Eurasian powers in the event of doomsday, Third World War, let them strike America, take out the strategic nuclear forces, and then the ridiculous idea is America will be able to respond. So there's some very deep strategic skullduggery going on here. We also see that Uncle Sam's bark may be worse than his bite now. The US Naval Institute has this very often useful site, USNI News, which is quite frank about crewing issues. And we see that 17 support ships, that is not frontline attack ships, a dozen of which, so the lion's share, are expeditionary supply vessels, the kind you need actually to relieve and restock the war fighting vessels. They could actually just be effectively mothballed, sidelined in the language of the headline, because they don't have the crews. There's only 127 sailors in the US Navy for these categories of ships for every 100 that are needed at sea at any time. There is there's no play here. There's no slack for Roermond, and in any civilian marine maritime setting, this would not, of course, be tolerated. And the same things happen to the British Navy in a more advanced way, that the crews are constantly being sent back out to sea because there's nobody else really available for the jobs. Meanwhile, in Ireland, allegedly one of the neutral members of the EU, although it's in the EU's military association PESCO, it's of course not in NATO. The Irish Republic is said to be open to buying Israeli drones. Now, the criticism they got during the negotiations over whether they would be in PESCO, which they ended up being, was that Ireland said, we mustn't compromise our constitutional and historic neutrality. And they said at the time, we won't be buying any attack equipment for land, sea and air. But this allegedly would go into the category of peacekeeping and other things that Ireland allows itself to do at home and abroad. One has to ask, if these are surveillance drones, who is the target audience? Is it the people of Ireland? Finally, on a military section from me, I apologize that this is just less than a minute in Czech, but it is important to see what's going on here. Petr Pavel, the president of the Czech Republic, the head of state, has weighed in, despite being a landlocked head of state, on the law of the sea. And in this clip, those of you who are watching in video with subtitles will be able to see, and then we'll summarize for you, what he said about the Nord Stream attack, which, although some time ago, continues to dominate geopolitics in Central Europe.
Týden Wall Street Journal uvedl, že za útokem na plynovod Nord Stream stojí vlastně ukrajinští vojáci. Údajně vlastně o tom útoku věděl i prezident Zelenský. Byl to podle vás legitimní cíl?
Já nemám nějaké usvědčující jasné informace, že by to opravdu byla Ukrajina, kdo za tím útokem stál. Na druhou stranu, když se vede ozbrojený konflikt, tak se vede nejenom proti vojenským cílům, ale i proti cílům, které mají strategický charakter. A pokud tento útok byl zaměřen na to, jak přerušit dodávky plynu a ropy do Evropy a zpětně peněz Rusku za tyto produkty, pak by to, a říkám schválně kondicionál, by to byl legitimní cíl. Ale já ty informace opravdu nemám.
So President Pavel says, I don't know whether Zelensky was in on it or not, because that was what was put to him by the interviewer. But if it was aimed at cutting off Russian oil and gas supplies to Europe, that's a legitimate target. You know, not the head of state or government of any of the Baltic Sea littoral nations, but a landlocked head of state. He's speaking here, I think, from his previous position as the head of NATO's military committee, and indeed perhaps beyond that, as a communist Czechoslovak general, as he then was, well, an army officer who then moved to general. He's so Atlanticist that there's very little Central European or Czech thinking in his message at all.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Alex. And just to finish off this defence segment, then we'll bring Sir Stephen Lovegrove on, because we were talking about Aukus last week, and he has now been appointed to Aukus, to the Aukus project. So this is from John Healey, our Minister of War. Aukus won't just bolster our defence and security, but can drive jobs and growth across the UK. So that's great. Sir Stephen has widely respected national security experience. He has a wealth of experience, according to the press release, as the National Security Advisor at the time of the Aukus announcement in 2021, and as the previous Permanent Secretary to the Ministry of Defence. He's going to lead a piece of work to reinforce the progress and benefits of the Aukus programme. So this is fantastic stuff. But Alex, very, very briefly, he has a bit of history, particularly with respect to the EU.
Yes, a piece of work would be the right term. It's a Whitehall internal phrase for a project. But yes, Lovegrove, was with no notable defence background. He was a wordsmith brought in from the private sector, was put into the very senior civil service, where he managed to champion Black Lives Matter and, as you've alluded to, really cheerlead for the EU at a very senior level. But that's what's expected of these national security advisors. It's a role that postdates my time. Only from 2010 onwards did we have a National Security Council or a National Security Advisor. We've had half a dozen so far, and they've all been extremely political.
Yes.